advertising, but more interestingly, what they're doing with automation across the fulfillment center network.
John Belton there from Gabelli Funds. Shares in Amazon were up 1.2% in the regular session. Paramount Skydance is planning to keep much of Warner Brothers Discovery intact. That's if Paramount does succeed in acquiring its rival film and TV studio. We are told Paramount CEO David Ellison wants to keep the creative teams of the two studios. However, there may be some consolidation in store for the marketing and distribution teams. Separately, we're being told that Paramount Skydance will begin a major round of layoffs this week. We're told 1,000 workers will be let go on Wednesday, and a second round will begin later this year. Qualcomm has unveiled some new chips and computers designed for AI data centers. The aim here is to challenge NVIDIA's dominance in the fastest growing part of the AI industry. Qualcomm shares jumped 11% in the regular session. Shares in NVIDIA higher by 2.8%. We check markets throughout the day here on Bloomberg. Records for the U.S. equity market on optimism over a trade deal between the U.S. and China. Right now in Tokyo, the Nikkei is negative 0.3%. In Seoul, the Kospi down 0.9%. And in Sydney, the ASX 200 is down 0.4%. Global news 24 hours a day. This is Bloomberg.
Get the news you need to start your day in just 15 minutes.
A new round of U.S.-China trade talks.
The latest efforts to end the war in Ukraine. Wake up with Bloomberg Daybreak U.S. Edition.
Gaza's fragile ceasefire agreement.
The NBA's 80th season underway. Available now on your podcast feed. Weekday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern. Google is in talks for a mega deal. Subscribe to Bloomberg Daybreak U.S. Edition on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything. For the Jewish Communal Fund, CEO Rachel Small.
I spent over 2 decades in the wealth management and the asset management field, and I thought, why not take that financial know-how and bring it to the philanthropic world? I used other desks before I came to JCF, and I think there's 3 things that really set JCF apart. We're incredibly service-minded, it's easy to use, and we have a great investment platform. I care very deeply about my Jewish heritage, and the Jewish Communal Fund gives me the imprint of the Jewish community on every gift that I make.
JCF, a leader in philanthropy for 53 years. New tax laws take effect in 2026, reducing some charitable deduction benefits. Open a JCF donor-advised fund before December 31st to maximize your impact and tax savings. Visit jcfny.org or call 212-752-8277.
Now, your 3-day weather forecast on Bloomberg 1130.
Clear skies tonight, low in the lower 40s in the city, upper 30s in the suburbs. Sunshine gets rain, increasing clouds Tuesday, breezy, high 55 to 60. Friday to mostly cloudy, breezy Tuesday night, low in the low to middle 40s. Showers developing Wednesday, breezy, high 55 to 60. Rain on Thursday, breezy, 60 to 65. I'm Scott Kaplan with your 3-day forecast on Bloomberg 1130.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand, and in your podcast feed.
On the latest Masters in Business podcast, my conversation with Liz Ann Saunders, Schwab's chief investment strategist, discussing the state of markets today.
There wasn't much about seeding it at the early stages because of that inventory build. Providing some time flexibility around when to make the decision of eating it in profit margins or passing it on to the consumers. We're now starting to see attempts to pass on to the consumers, but maybe the more interesting thing to consider right now is so much focus on goods that are impacted by tariffs. What's the rate of inflation in those goods? Trying to gauge the tariff impact on the inflation statistics, but what we're also starting to see is demand destruction and switching on the part of consumers. So I think we have to analyze the impact of tariffs in a parallel fashion, not just gauging what the inflation impact is. You can do that by separating out goods and services within the goods categories of an inflation metric like CPI, look at those that are directly impacted by tariffs, not impacted by tariffs, but there's the demand destruction side of things. So we track the weekly consumer spending data, and if you separate that into tariff-impacted categories, that's where you're seeing a compression in that spend. But there's, the feedback loop that happens in a company, right? tight labor, where if companies, because they don't have that ability to pass most of it on to consumers, in part because of the demand destruction that I'm talking about, then there's that eating in profit margins. And then does that feed into the labor market side of things? I think that's why the Fed did what it did, the risk management, the insurance cut to try to stem any weakness in the labor market.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Masters in Business podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
This is the Bloomberg Money Minute. Hopes are rising that the U.S. and China are close to nailing down a trade and tariff deal, with President Trump and China's Xi Jinping slated to meet face-to-face later this week in South Korea. Add in rising expectations that the Federal Reserve will lower interest rates at this week's meeting, and Wall Street saw big gains today, with all the major averages closing at fresh all-time highs. The Dow today at 337, the Nasdaq shooting up 433, and the S&P up 83. With demand for safe haven gold diminishing, though, spot gold prices dipped to under $4,000 an ounce today. Amazon is looking to thin out its workforce again. 2 years ago, it laid off 27,000. Now Reuters reports it's looking to cut 30,000 staffers. That starts on Tuesday. And Lululemon is looking to offer more than just yoga and athletic wear. It's partnered up with the NFL and Fanatics on a line of tees, hoodies, and more, all featuring your favorite NFL teams. Tom Busby, Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcast, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
I'm Michelle Hussein, and you're listening to some highlights from this week's The Michelle Hussein Show podcast on Bloomberg Radio.